All right, everybody, let's make this happen. Citizens United versus FEC, the Federal Elections Committee of 2010. um, you know, this case is highly interesting because it deals a lot with the perspective of campaign financing and the perspective of how much money can an industry or organization or a person of wealth or even someone without wealth can provide political campaigns per person, per campaign, per instance. Um, and so, with that in mind, let's kind of dig into this perspective, shall we? We shall. All right. All right. The very first thing to understand is Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act of 2002. Now, this act provides corporations and unions cannot spend their own money on election-related communications, which promote or condemn a candidate. In other words, that particular organization, that corporation, that specific union can't put money into their own ads in regards of electing someone, whether it's to condemn them or to promote them. They can create these ads. They can create these commercials specifically based upon their agenda, right? And this includes broadcast, cable, or satellite, communications that refer to a specific candidate running for federal office. For instance, the National Teachers Federation, or the teachers union specifically, can't create ads on their own condemning, you know, President 45. They can't do that, right? Not only can they not do that, within 30 days of the election, it's even more so where it's more concentrated and where they'll pour in more money into it. Plus, campaign ads become a whole lot more expensive 30 days of election time, basically at the tipping point. And on top of that, it's publicly distributed. In other words, they can create a campaign ad, whether it's by broadcast, cable, satellite, or any other communications outlet of that nature, and distribute it on by themselves. Let's say on their website or their social media platforms. So this act basically disavowed all corporations and organizations from taking it upon themselves to publicly disavow or publicly enhance their their candidate or someone who they don't want to be a part of either the presidency or a Senate race, a House race, a gubernatorial, so on and so forth. Now, the First Amendment to the Constitution protects the speech of every American to speak out, right? We already talked about this before in the First Amendment. You do have the freedom of speech. Now, Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. The interesting perspective about this is that this is what this particular concept, Citizens United versus the FEC, is all about. It's a concept of where is the line of free speech for the individual and for the organization. There's a famous line, or maybe an infamous line, during the 2012 election season, where Mitt Romney specifically stated that corporations are people too, and the concept that corporations make up people. People are the foundation of any good or bad organization and corporation itself. So this concept really digs deep into how much can an organization or a corporation pitch in regards of funding for a campaign, for themselves, by themselves, and so on and so forth. Now, an overview here is pretty simplistic, right? Citizens United is a non-profit organization which released a documentary about Hillary, the movie, right? And it was very critical, and to say it was very critical is probably an understatement, right? It said it was very critical of Hillary Clinton on the basis of freedom of speech. It was specifically a video on demand, and it was to be shown within 30 days of the primary election. And let me explain this concept or this documentary, if you will. It's about almost a 2 hour documentary about Hillary Clinton and her husband Bill, as well as the Clinton Foundation, which was a nonprofit organization in regards of expanding the concept of global and economic politics. And the actual video was so scathing, right? It got to the point where it got nasty in the perspective of what it's actually stating about Hillary Clinton. Facts be darned, right? This documentary did not have any specific facts. It was all based upon propaganda, assumptions, and innuendos. And this was going to be released approximately, if you will, 30 days of the primary election itself. Now, this 30 days of the primary election was several years before 2010, to kind of get her out of the way, if you will, right? To kind of pitch her out of the picture. The district court ruled that the film was prohibited in electioneering communication. In other words, what they're saying is that the video or the documentary, which was to be distributed, was purposely filled with lies on the concept that it harms Hillary Clinton beyond measure. In other words, it's supposed to hurt Hillary Clinton to the point where either she can drop out of the race or get totally out of politics without any factual information, full of innuendos and insinuations, a whole bunch of assumptions and lies about Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton, and the Clinton Foundation. But not only that, Citizens United argued that government, the FEC, is violating the First Amendment rights of corporations to free speech. In other words, it was regulating what political speech happens to be. Now, keep in mind that the government, or the FEC, Federal Elections Commission, is saying, look, we're not doing this. We would have allowed, right, this video, this movie, and put in very big quotations here, to be released if it had factual information, right? If this was a situation where it wasn't so blatant that you are trying to irreparably harm Hillary Clinton, then okay, maybe we'll go ahead and allow this. Matter of fact, if you did the same thing to, let's say, John McCain, the late John McCain, then fine. You know, we would allow you to have this if it had evidence to back up these statements. But we still wouldn't have allowed it if you did something like this to John McCain, who's a Republican. It doesn't matter who it is. It was just scathing bunch of lies, innuendos, and so on and so forth. All right. Now, the case was appealed and went to the Supreme Court. Now, keep in mind that the movie is still not published because it can't be. You still have to follow the previous ruling, even if it's going to be sent up for a hearing in the Supreme Court. Now, excuse me, the decision of Citizens United was pretty interesting. It really shows, right, what politicians, in regards of even business people, really value when it comes to being involved in politics. They look at it as one of the most important concepts you could ever be a part of. All right. So let's go into the perspective of what they're trying to relay here, right? Let's go into perspective of exactly what they're trying to relay. All right, let's move on. So, pardon me. So, one argument is whether or not corporations have the rights of individuals in matter of speech. Um, so, is an important concept or argument that's made, right? What they're saying is, do corporations have the same rights as individuals when it comes to free speech? And they're trying to convey, does these organizations, corporations, multi-billion dollar corporations, can do or say what they wish equally to individuals? Also, it talks specifically about in a 5-4 decision in favor of Citizens United. And this is key because there's a few questions that have to be answered here. All right. I didn't put it in here, but I really want you to get these questions because these questions are critically important. All right. Here are the questions. The first one: did the Supreme Court's decision in a previous case, which is in McConnell, resolve all constitutional as applied challenges to the BCRA when it upheld the disclosure requirements of the statute as constitutional? And, let me repeat that again. Did the Supreme Court's decision in McConnell, which was the previous um, situation which I talked about in the very first slide, resolve all constitutional as applied challenges to the BCRA? Go back to the second slide when I talked about the BCRA. When it upheld disclosure requirements of the statute as constitutional. In other words, does the BCRA is the BCRA fully constitutional to the point where it answers all questions, all concerns overall? Also, if a communication lacks a clear plea to vote for or against a particular candidate, is it subject to regulation under the BCRA? Let me repeat this question for you. If a communication lacks a clear plea to vote for or to vote against a particular candidate, right? To vote for or to vote against a particular candidate, is it subject to regulation under the BCRA? The third question, which I find fascinating, and hopefully you do too, which leads into the 5-4 decision in favor of Citizens United. Should a feature length documentary, should a feature length documentary about a candidate, any candidate, for a particular office, I'm sorry, for political office, I apologize, for a political office, be treated like the advertisements, treated as the advertisement at issue in McConnell, and therefore be subject to regulation under BCRA? Let me repeat this. And this is one of the most important questions of the three. Should a feature length documentary about a candidate for political office be treated like the advertisements at issue in McConnell and therefore be subject to regulation under the BCRA. Now, the very first question, which they answer these questions. The first question about, did the Supreme Court decision in McConnell resolve all constitutional as applied challenges to the BCRA when it upheld the disclosure requirements of the statute of the Constitution? That answer is no. That answer is no. Now, the other question I mentioned was that if a communication lacks a clear plea to vote for or against a particular candidate, is it subject to regulation under the BCRA? The answer is yes on this one. But one of the most important questions was the last one I asked, which was, should a feature film or feature documentary about a candidate for political office be treated like the advertisements at issue in McConnell and therefore be subject to regulation under BCRA? And that answer was yes, which led into a 5-4 decision in favor of Citizens United. Now, Justice Roberts, Justice Scalia, Justice Kennedy, Justice Thomas, and Justice Alito specifically stated that Citizens United had every right overall to commence what they did. In other words, the Supreme Court overruled a couple cases, which is McConnell versus FEC, as well as Austin versus Michigan Chamber of Commerce overall. And the prior cases like those, McConnell versus FEC and Austin versus Michigan Chamber of Commerce, the court had held that political speech may be banned based on the speaker's corporate identity. So based upon the identity of the corporation, which they can hide their corporation, they ban that. They overturn this perspective, right? So by a 5-4 vote along ideological lines, right? So Republicans was all for Citizens United, while Democratic justices were totally against it. Stevens, Ginsburg, Breyer, Sotomayor were all Democratic justices, which were brought into by either President Obama or President Clinton. They voted against this. They were the four that voted against this. Now, this determined that citizens and corporations do have a First Amendment free speech right to make independent campaign expenditures just as individuals do. So they are allowed equally to consider themselves and these corporations as, in quotations, people, and be able to provide money for campaigns almost on an unlimited basis. Almost on an unlimited basis. Keep in mind that the majority emphasized its view that free speech rights do not depend on the identity of the speaker, whether corporate or individual. So the interesting thing about this was that if a corporation decides to put money in an organization or in a campaign, they can do so just as equally as individuals do. And that individuals can put in X amount of money as opposed to corporations, they could put in X amount of money without actually putting their name on the dotted line to show that, yes, we, company, corporation X, that we actually go about supporting Y candidate. Even if Y candidate is blatantly one way or another, it doesn't matter. And what Democrats were concerned about was the concept that there would be much more corruption, right, in the perspective of campaigns. There'd be much more individuals there to corrupt the perspective of campaigns. You put in X amount of money, and these corporations need your help to pass a certain piece of legislation or to help lobby them or to help push forth an idea, then they're in the pockets of these candidates. That's what Democrats were afraid of. Ironically, this happens a lot, not just on the side of Republicans, but also on Democrats as well. So the fear may have been warranted, but it is warranted for both sides. Now, do corporations have the same First Amendment rights as what we call real persons? Now, the answer is yes, that corporations are associations of individuals. In other words, corporations are made up of individuals, and because of that, they too have the same rights as quote unquote real persons, as individuals. And they too are entitled to the same First Amendment rights as individuals. And this line underneath this is extremely important because any legislation that affects the political process should be suspect. And we do. We look at this concept as suspect. Not just if you watch Fox News or MSNBC or Huffington Post or even Breitbart, right? The far left to the far right, to the right to the left, and even smack dab in the middle for NPR and PBS. Doesn't matter. You put organizations and news organizations are always going to question and be suspect of corporations putting money in the pockets or in the campaigns of candidates, whether it's on a state level or a national level. Now, some people believe that no, right? That the side of money should not dominate the political process by being able to out contribute the opponents. So, what many people are concerned about is that corporations are going to be able to outmaneuver in regards of funding of a candidate and therefore drown out the voice of the people who are giving the 5, 10, 15, $20 campaign contributions to candidates on a state or local or on a national level. And believe that this is by far not an equal or level playing field. And the concept is that the First Amendment rights are for real persons. And many people believe that's what the First Amendment is about, real persons, not the artificial created by the state or created in the funnel, such as a corporation. And that's something that is extremely important to grasp and understand, right? So many people believe, yes, corporations are people because they make up corporations and they have the same fundamental First Amendment rights as any individual person, him or herself, by themselves or individually speaking. While you have another subset of people on the opposite end that's clearly saying, no, 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 no. When you're able to outspend individuals leaps and bounds, they don't have the same rights as individuals because they're trying to purchase a candidate for their political gain. And this continues to come up for debate even during campaign messaging. For instance, Bernie Sanders criticized Pete Buttigieg for having a campaign event in what were called like wine caves in California, when you had some millionaires donating $5,000 and $10,000 for his campaign to run for president of the United States. And Bernie Sanders is like, they shouldn't have equal representation as, let's say, Joe Smith from Smithville, Arkansas, who gave $10 to his campaign. They believe that more people that the candidates are going to listen to the individuals that provide larger donations than smaller donations, drowning out the individuals that gave just what they had for their campaign because they believe in such campaigns. Now, the downfall of this comes along with people like George Soros and the Koch brothers to influence government even more by pulling out their wallets. Now, George Soros on the far left, the Koch brothers on the two on the right. The individual in the middle, that particular Koch brother, one half of the Koch brothers, passed away recently. But the Koch organization, and you probably, if you look at like train, when the train passes by these freights, and you saw Koch's Koch, Koch Incorporated or corporations, they own those particular freight cars, and they move freight from one city to the other, and so on and so forth, among other manufacturing industrial areas of that nature. But they have a major influence in campaigns because they pull out their wallets and put millions upon millions and millions of dollars in campaigns with the purpose of their agenda to be sent out. And that's what they're concerned about overall. But also keep in mind that arguments in favor of unlimited campaign spending goes pretty far out there. In other words, money allows the funding of modern communication, which is essential to reach voters. You have to spend money in order to gain the attention of the people themselves to vote for you. Interestingly enough, this goes pretty far out there in regards of, let's say, Michael Bloomberg recently spending about over $500 million of his own money for to run for a campaign in which he was going to lose overall. But he had to reach many people to get his message across, and he did that for a certain time frame, right? But not only that, political communication informed the voters themselves. All right, and that's what happens. Also, government should not regulate political speech, which is basic in a democracy. They also said that just because a candidate takes contributions does not mean that as an elected official, he or she will do favors for them on a contributable level, right? So they're saying just because they get contributions doesn't exactly mean these candidates are going to go out and just do their bidding for them. All right. Also, opponents of unlimited money say growing cynicism among the U.S. population based on the idea that democracy is for sale now. So people saying you put money into it, large amounts of money, their vote is for sale. The candidate is for sale. Also, also, the large amounts of money spent on campaigns make Congress dependent upon these dollars. And Congress goes out to do fundraising on a consistent basis. We talked about this before about House Representatives do this regularly. They continue to go out because every 2 years they need to raise money for their election campaigns. And we talked about at the very bottom in the study of UC Berkeley, they see that someone making a meeting with a member of Congress was explicitly revealed to be a donor. So donors have direct line of communication to Congress as opposed to what the normal individual does, where they can easily just push them away. All right. And this kind of ends everything overall, right? So our vote does matter, at least in this political cartoon, but sometimes when you are able to spend big money, your vote matters a whole lot more than some politicians. All right, so with that in mind, we're done with this concept, right? I'll provide additional information for you along those lines. Please let me know if you need anything. Email me, and I'll be able to answer you immediately. All right, be safe, be responsible, be healthy, And I will talk to you soon.